The sky over the Californian coast was gray that afternoon, a foreboding suspended above the small town of Marlin's Shore. The waves broke with inconsolable fury against the pier, as if they wanted to destroy the stakes that dared to invade the domain of the sea. Not far from there, the house Michael Sullivan had inherited from his parents was peeling under the salinity of time and circumstances. It was a fitting metaphor for his own life. A facade once bright and promising, now in ruins. Sullivan, his hair showing more salt than pepper, moved slowly through the dusty attic. Each object he touched seemed to whisper fragments of a happier past, a golden era of innovation and success that he could no longer reach. These were memories he preferred to keep dormant, but necessity forced him to look for something he could sell, something to keep him afloat for one more month. That's when his trembling hands found an old folder hidden beneath a blanket. Sullivan opened it with hesitant fingers, and what he saw made him forget the cold dampness that penetrated his bones. They were documents, printed emails, contracts, the spoils of a corporate war he didn't know had been fought. His heart, which had long beaten in a resigned rhythm, quickened at the prospect of vindication. In this town, every whisper carried the weight of condemnation, and Sullivan knew that the line between failure and redemption was as thin as the mist that clung to the coast at dusk. He needed allies, and there was only one person he could trust: Elizabeth, his sister, the journalist who never bowed to storms. With the documents in hand, Sullivan set out to find Elizabeth. Together, they would have to navigate a plot of betrayals and secrets that could very well drag them into the depths. But the truth was a beacon, and Sullivan was willing to face the storm to reach it. As daylight gave way to darkness, Sullivan and Elizabeth met in the Old Town Cafe, the only place that still held some human warmth in Marlin's Shore. The walls, adorned with faded photos of sunnier days, seemed to watch the siblings with melancholic curiosity. Elizabeth, whose eyes were as piercing as her mind, examined the documents with a mix of incredulity and fury. "This changes everything, Mike," she whispered, her voice low enough to get lost in the cafe's murmur, but laden with a power that only bombastic truths possess. "If this is true, we can clear your name and expose all the corruption that sank your company." Sullivan nodded, feeling a thread of hope intertwine with the fear and anxiety that had accompanied him since his downfall. The discovery was not just a chance at redemption. It was a weapon, and he knew that weapons could both defend and destroy. "We need to be careful," he replied. "These documents won't just shake up the town, but they could put us in danger." They agreed to act discreetly, aware that the wrong eyes and ears could be lurking in any shadow or whisper on the wind. The journey to the truth would be more perilous than any storm Marlin's Shore had ever faced. In the days that followed, Sullivan and Elizabeth charted a cautious course, interviewing former colleagues and unraveling lies buried under layers of deceit. Each new revelation was like a wave breaking against the fragile vessel of their hopes, threatening to sink them. But Sullivan's determination was like the tide, relentless and unyielding. Meanwhile, Alex Mercer, the FBI agent, with eyes that seemed to see through souls, watched from a distance. Mercer had his own reasons for being interested in the documents and Sullivan's fate. He knew that truth had many facets, and some were as sharp as broken glass. Mercer was prepared to piece together the shards, even if it meant cutting himself on the secrets Sullivan unearthed. Sullivan's story was one of many woven into the tapestry of Marlin's shore, but it was one that could change the entire pattern if pulled hard enough. And Sullivan, with each thread of truth he unraveled, was pulling with all the might of a man who had nothing left to lose. As the investigation progressed, the tension in Marlin's shore became palpable, like the electricity that precedes a storm. Elizabeth, with her journalistic acumen, began connecting dots that many would prefer remained disconnected. The clues led them to a series of interviews with former employees of Sullivan's startup, each adding a piece to the puzzle that was forming. Yet, each piece was also a reminder of how high the powerful could build their thrones of lies. Sullivan, despite the growing fear, felt invigorated. With each new fact uncovered, he rediscovered parts of himself he thought he had lost in the bankruptcy. His shrewdness, his entrepreneurial spirit, his courage. And with each sleepless night, each shadow passing by the window, he knew he was getting closer to the truth. On a particularly quiet night, when the moon was just a thin silver crescent watching over the world below, Sullivan and Elizabeth gathered in his house, spreading photos, newspaper clippings, and notes across the kitchen table. "We're close," said Elizabeth, her voice a firm whisper. "Someone inside your own company betrayed you, Mike, and I'm almost certain of who it was." Before Sullivan could respond, a piercing sound cut through the night, the sound of breaking glass. In an instant, both were on their feet, hearts racing with shock. Sullivan moved first, grabbing a baseball bat he'd kept close since the anonymous threats had begun. They advanced cautiously towards the living room, where the window overlooking the backyard now lay shattered. On the floor, glinting under the moonlight, was a simple concrete block with a note tied around it. Sullivan picked it up, unfolded the paper, and read the hastily scribbled words, "Stop looking, or you'll be next." The warning was clear, but instead of frightening Sullivan, it ignited a rage he didn't know he possessed. He looked at Elizabeth, saw the same fiery determination in her eyes, and knew they would not stop. Together, they would face the approaching storm, ready to unravel the shadows and illuminate the truth, no matter the cost. The threat was a watershed moment. Sullivan knew that, unlike the tides that washed the shores of Marlin's shore, the waves of danger they now faced did not offer a peaceful retreat. Truth had become an obsession, an inextinguishable flame that consumed every thought and action. The fear of being the next target was not enough to stop them. In fact, it only served to reinforce their resolve to unearth what someone was desperate to keep hidden. In the days that followed, the partnership between Sullivan and Elizabeth solidified, turning into an unbreakable alliance. They were driven by a shared purpose, a commitment to justice that transcended blood ties. With every interview conducted, every document unveiled, they pieced together a mosaic of betrayal that began to point, unquestionably, to a surprising source: Sullivan's former partner, Daniel Harrows. Harrows had become an enigmatic figure in the town, rarely seen, but whose influence seemed to stretch to every corner. He was the missing link, the piece that could complete the puzzle. And as Sullivan and Elizabeth drew closer to the truth, Mercer, the FBI agent, also began to close in, though his motivations remained a mystery. The inevitable meeting between the three converged on a stormy night, where rain fell in heavy curtains, obscuring the normally quiet streets of Marlin's Shore. Mercer found them in the town's library, an old building that smelled of must and wisdom. "You're playing with fire," Mercer said, his voice as cold as the air that preceded the storm. "Then help us control the flames," Elizabeth replied defiantly. Mercer hesitated, his gaze oscillating between Sullivan and the documents scattered on the oak table. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to expel the weight of the world, he agreed. "I'm after the truth, just like you. But you have no idea of the magnitude of what you're up against." The three formed a tense alliance, each with their own demons and desires, but united by a common goal. And as the storm roared outside, Sullivan felt an odd calm. For the first time in a long time, he was not alone in his fight. Together, they would mount the final assault on the empire of lies that Harrows had built. It was a race against time. As the closer they got to the truth, the more the shadows that pursued them grew. Michael Sullivan's story was about to reach its climax, and Marlin's Shore would never be the same. As the night progressed and the storm outside became a symphony of thunder and rain, Sullivan, Elizabeth, and Mercer worked together, the pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together. The information they had collected formed a shocking mosaic of greed and revenge, with Daniel Harrows at the center, pulling the strings of a scheme that extended beyond the small Marlin's Shore. With the break of dawn, the trio confronted Harrows in his mansion, a building that now seemed more a fortress of secrets than a home. The evidence was laid out, not as an accusation, but as a mirror of truth that Harrows could no longer deny. Mercer, with the authority of his position, ensured that justice would take its course. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Harrows was arrested, and the revelations that followed shook the fabric of the business community. Sullivan, whose reputation was restored, chose not to return to the world that had destroyed him. Instead, he found a new purpose, helping other entrepreneurs protect themselves against the betrayals he had suffered. Elizabeth, in turn, published a series of articles that not only earned her awards, but also sparked a movement for transparency and ethics in business that spread like a wave of change. And Mercer, his mission accomplished, moved on to his next case, carrying with him the memory that sometimes the most unlikely alliances can illuminate the darkest depths. Michael Sullivan's story had begun with the discovery of documents in a dusty attic, and ended with the revelation that even when the waves of life knock you down, it's possible to get up and rebuild, stronger than ever. The town of Marlin's Shore, under the glow of the sun that followed the storm, seemed to breathe a new beginning. And Sullivan, walking through the streets he thought he knew, felt rejuvenated, ready to face whatever the future might bring.